Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Rebel Mama podcast. I'm Aleks Jassem.
And I'm Nikita, Stanley. And today on the show, we're discussing separation, divorce, and the pursuit of pleasure. Mm-hmm. This topic comes up a lot in our community, and it seems like there are a lot of women out there finding the courage to choose themselves and their happiness over a life and a relationship structure that no longer serves them.
I love that. It's liberating.
Well, exactly. And in that way, liberation to us equals pleasure, which is why we chose to cover this topic in our pleasure season.
I know. I love it. Do you love that as part of pleasure?
Pain, pleasure.
It is.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. They go hand in hand.
Endings
right?
can be beginnings. We'll get to all that.
But to help us have this conversation, we have a special guest in studio today, the one and only Julie Tyas of Tyas Family Law.
Welcome.
Thank you
We're
for
big
having
fans,
me.
as you know.
Thank you.
Shall we run through your bio quickly?
Oh, sure. Why
Just
not?
sit there and blush.
Sure.
Julie is the founder of Tyas Family Law. She has almost 17 years of experience as a family law lawyer and is experienced in all aspects of family law, from straightforward matters to complex separations and divorce involving property division, high conflict parenting issues, child and spousal support, and domestic contracts, including both cohabitation agreements and marriage contracts. Julie is responsive and approachable, and her objective is straightforward: guiding clients toward a much happier place in their lives calmly, clearly, and as painlessly and cost-effectively as possible.
That's all pleasure points.
Yeah. Welcome to the show, Julie.
Yeah, we're so
Thank you.
excited
It's
to
gonna be
have you.
interesting.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a great conversation.
Yes, that's probably an understatement. Okay, so first things first, we have to ask you, what made you pursue a career in family law to begin with?
So it wasn't really a childhood ambition. I really had my mind set on being a sports psychologist, which has nothing to do with family law. But sort of in fourth year of undergrad, I made a change. I was planning on being a sports psychologist. It sort of dawned on me one day that I didn't want to do that anymore. My mom sort of suggested that since I'm an analytical person, maybe I'd want to go into a career involving the law. So there you have it. I applied to law school. I talked to some friends who are also applying, and they said, even if you don't want to be a lawyer, you can always, do a lot of things with a law degree. So
right.
Yeah, it's never bad to
and
have one of those bad boys.
Yeah. And then when I was in my first year of law school, there was a posting at the school by a local family lawyer in Windsor who needed 2 law students to help him sort of on call. And I applied for that. He hired me, and that was my first sort of foray into family law. And I was like, this is really, really dramatic and interesting.
Yeah. And it's just gotten
so
probably more
it's
and more
like
so.
a dirty romance novel, but
Right.
in real life.
That's right.
Oh my God,
yeah.
it is.
You
It's
get
true.
the behind the curtain
We hear a
look.
lot. We hear a
The
lot.
nitty gritty stories.
Yeah, we do.
Julie's here for the drama.
So what would you say makes your approach different than that of other people in your field? Because we've had that feedback because we work together too, and Julie is now on our directory, and we love you so much.
Thank you.
And we've got all the feedback from the people that we have sent to you that your approach is different. So what is it about you?
It's interesting. I think that I'm a really good listener. So I really try to hone in initially when I'm speaking with someone about what their goals are. And it may not be that we can achieve all of their goals because we are working within a legal framework, but hearing what their goals are and helping to try to get there and setting their expectations, in a reasonable way so that they're not going into it thinking, oh, I'm just going to get everything that I want, which I think some lawyers will promote as maybe a marketing tool. I'm very real with the clients, and I think that they appreciate a real approach because the uncertainty of that process, and usually people are going through this for the first time, although not always, they want a sounding board, someone who's going to listen to them and hear what their goals are and then try to achieve them in a reasonable way without blowing up their entire family.
Right.
Yeah, practical. Compassionate is a word used for you a lot too,
that's
which
nice.
is really nice.
That's
it is
nice.
because sometimes maybe those phone calls can be a little jarring and cold, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah. And I think people are very nervous to call a family lawyer or to
Right.
send an email and make any kind of a contact to initiate that next step. I think people are very nervous. So I try to calm them down and make them realize I'm a normal person. I have my own family. I see all of this. I've been doing this for a long time, and I can help them.
Okay, so why don't we talk about some 2024 divorce trends? What is hot in divorce right now? We see a lot of like
divorce is hot right now.
Yeah, divorce is obviously hot right now.
Yeah, it is.
But, you know, conscious uncoupling comes to mind, gray divorces come to mind, nesting cohabitation agreements. Like, what are you seeing that you would consider a divorce trend in 2024?
I think just given where the housing market has been in the last couple of years, nesting agreements or nesting arrangements are becoming more and more common. And just so everyone understands what that is, it's where the children stay in the home and the parents rotate in and out. And usually there's some kind of a structured schedule. Not always. Sometimes it's a bit more of a pseudo nesting arrangement. But the point is that the kids will stay in the home and have a stable environment that they're familiar with, and the parents are the ones who rotate in and out. And the reason I think this is more and more common is because people are not listing their houses, or they're trying to wait it out a little bit to see if the market's going to improve in the spring. And they may not have, you know, the means to each go rent a place, or one person rent a place. We're also seeing people sometimes, if they do have the means to rent a second place and not stay with family and friends when it's not their parenting time, they'll rent one place and the parents will rotate in and out of that, which I've never seen happen super successfully, because you're still in that other person's space.
Well, that's the thing, yeah.
But it is pretty common. People are getting really creative to think about ways to give each spouse their own time, their time away, you know, without being in a pressure cooker situation.
Right.
Just given that finances are tight for many people right now.
And it's good for the kids too, I would assume, to not be ripped out of a community or a school and just stay in their home and have that stability there too.
It is good for the kids. It's not a long-term solution, but it is a really good short-term solution to help them.
Especially if they're young, maybe.
Especially if they're young, and to help them get used to both parents not being around at the same time all the time.
Right.
So it's a nice transition.
And so you're seeing that during like the separation period more?
We're seeing that early on in the separation period. You know, what I would say is maybe a trend this year is that those nesting periods are lasting a little bit longer, because people are delaying selling the house, or, you know, maybe one spouse wants to buy out the other, which is sometimes an option. They're just delaying it.
It gives more time.
Yeah.
And we're in the GTA. I'm like, let's be real. Toronto, 2 houses.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing, because you don't want to move out. Like, I get it.
Yeah,
you wouldn't want to just be like, okay, well, where can we afford to turn this one house into 2? Like, you're looking at a couple hours.
And usually, I mean, until, you know, the property division has been agreed upon, or support arrangements have been agreed upon, and incomes are analyzed, people don't know what they're going to get, right? So it's a short-term solution to allow, you know, the financial status quo to continue for as long as possible, while everyone is exchanging financial documents and trying to work out a long-term solution or deal.
I mean, those are the amicable couples, obviously, I guess, because that's more on the positive side of both people.
Yeah. I mean, it can be contentious still, but in really high conflict cases, the nesting arrangement doesn't work.
Right.
Yeah.
Because you're still in each other's space.
Yeah.
In some way, shape, or form.
And there's often, you know, allegations of domestic violence or other abuse.
Right.
So
of course. Then you have to like have more of a clean break.
Yeah.
Ideally. And then gray divorces. Are you noticing a lot of people? Because that
apparently
covers
that's
people
a trend.
over 50 getting divorced.
You know what? I think it's always sort of been a trend. I remember when I first started practicing, one of the first cases that I worked on as a junior lawyer, it was a gray divorce. And I remember, you know, talking with my employer at the time and other colleagues who were working on the case, you know, about why would somebody do this? I mean, I was young and naive as well, but why would somebody sort of wait until they're older to do this? But, you know, a lot of the people, and I think I even had a conversation with a client about this at one point. And she said, you know, in a lot of situations, they're waiting for the kids to grow up.
Yeah, they're empty nesters now, so they can live their lives.
And if they haven't devoted time and attention to their own relationship, once those kids leave, it's like, oh, who are you?
Right.
You know?
Right. That makes sense. And then especially if everyone's retiring.
Yeah.
Then you don't even have the work place to separate you for a big
there's so many
day.
life changes that happen. Like your kids leave, you're focused on retirement, it's different.
And I find many people do wait till their kids are at least like out of high school or out of university to do the thing. But then is that better or worse? Like, who's to say younger kids don't, you know what I mean? Like at one point they're still going to have to accept it and go through the process. And then how does that make them feel later if they know that their parents weren't happy for a long time, but they were only staying together for them? Like I always think about the psychological part of it too.
And I mean, the research that we read and that we're exposed to, it's pretty consistent in that children who are exposed to conflict are the ones who don't fare very well in the long term, right? But the kids whose parents make an effort, even though they're not in a romantic relationship, but they make an effort to still do things as a family, to keep the conflict low, to keep the kids out of it, to not disparage the other parent in front of the kids. Those are the situations where, the kids they're usually going to be okay.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's comforting for people to know.
Hot tips.
Yeah.
Your firm offers free 20-minute consultations. What topics most frequently come up in these conversations?
I think people who reach out initially, they sort of don't really have a plan. They just are maybe desperate enough to get somebody on the phone. And it takes courage, I think, to set up that call for many people. So I find that most of the time people are not coming in with specific questions. They just want somebody to give them some preliminary advice on maybe one particular issue, and just feel that they have somebody in their corner. And that's really the point of the 20-minute calls. It's just to see if it's going to be a good fit, a mutual good fit. And then we usually set up a longer consultation after that if it's necessary, because obviously you can't cover off on that much in 20 minutes, but usually we can tackle, a couple of urgent issues and urgent questions that they have.
I'm wondering.
That's a free call.
And that's a free call.
Yes.
Yeah. And you guys should all make it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm just wondering, because when you first call in, it must be hard to even start that conversation. So do you prompt them with anything?
I do. I know that it's difficult for people to make that call. So, I sort of have a mental script of standard questions that I need to know to be able to guide them a little bit. And I feel like throughout me sort of taking charge of that, people gain confidence in me or in anyone in my firm. And then they're more likely to sort of relax a little bit and feel better at the end of it. Like feel at least that even though there is uncertainty still, that they have someone in their corner. If it escalates in terms of conflict within the home, they know who they can call us back.
Right. Yeah. Just to establish that touch point and know that they have someone in their corner.
So hard to take that first step.
So stats say that women are more likely to initiate divorce than men. Is that consistent with what you see in your law firm? Is it a lot of women reaching out?
I feel like it sort of ebbs and flows at times. For whatever reason, it seems like it's more men initiating it, and other times it's more women. I think if I were to sort of look at the last 4 or so years since the pandemic, I think it's more women, at least in my practice. I don't know about other firms, but there seemed to be it's more common for women to initiate it. And I think it is perhaps tied to maybe more domestic violence that was happening within the home during the pandemic, for sure. Domestic violence rates skyrocketed, and also mental health issues that come up. And I think women feel that we're in a place now that if they want to initiate a separation, they are able to.
Right.
Yeah, and there's less of a stigma, obviously, about separating and divorce nowadays.
Yeah, for sure. So with that in mind, what advice would you give to men who want to keep their marriage intact, knowing what you know?
Put the seat down.
Just stop talking. Yeah, why don't we just give the advice?
Okay, here we go. Put the
agree with everything we say
first. Weekly flowers.
Yeah,
but don't talk to me in the morning.
No,
but is it like communication breakdowns? Would like maybe some counseling work well? Would you like?
So the interesting thing with women who initiate a divorce or a separation process, I find, is that they have come to that decision in a very slow, gradual way. Women are more, I think, thoughtful when it comes to that, at least in my experience. I don't want to generalize, but they have accepted that marriage is over before they even initiate the process.
Oh.
Whereas men sometimes can be a little more rash, and maybe regret certain decisions later on. But the women who, often that we work with, they've processed this already. They've already done their grieving.
They've done all the work.
They're ready. So I don't know if there's much that their partner can do at that point to kind of get them back. I'm not sure. That might sound really negative.
It sounds on track.
No, but that does
hard.
sound like character for women to just be like, to make a decision once they've already thought it through all the way. Yeah. And then have already like emotionally separated before they engage with a lawyer. That makes sense to me.
We also, we have an obligation, like as family lawyers, we have an obligation to at least canvas whether reconciliation is an option. So we always do that. One of the questions I ask is, have you considered marriage counseling? Sometimes if that hasn't happened yet, and men in this case want to do it because they feel like, oh wow, I maybe should have done this earlier when she asked, or but it's at a point now where it's kind of, you're at a crossroads. We have tools, we have resources, we have a whole roster of people that we refer to for marriage counseling, and usually the women are receptive to that. It doesn't mean that the relationship's going to work out, but I think that having a marriage counselor, especially if your relationship is in a bit of a crisis situation or state, having someone really good who can get involved quickly and try, there's no harm in it, right? And even if it switches to sort of co-parenting discussions about how to communicate better for the purposes of being co-parents, or for the purpose of being a co-parent, there's still benefit to that.
Yeah, for sure.
I think also as women, though, we're used to going to our support system and our female friends and like talking about everything, getting advice, surveying everyone, and kind of doing that whole process. And that's why we're more far along a lot of the times, is because the men actually just hold all that stuff inside. They think it's a failure and they have none of that outlet, right? So
I mean, I don't know, but could you imagine a man going to a bar and just like opening up to his guy friend about,
you're like, listen, it's really hard and it's not going well, and what do you guys think? And I'm like, what are we talking about? No, nobody's leaving anybody.
No. It's not happening.
Okay, so let's turn the tables on it. Obviously there are men out there initiating divorces too. What tends to be their reasoning?
We want to know.
So tell us about the men.
I don't want to generalize, but I think that often there's more financial considerations for men. So sometimes that means that their spouse is a bit of a spender. Sometimes men go ahead and get advice from a lawyer. I would say more often than women, even, before they've initiated anything, to find out what their rights and what their obligations are. And maybe they want to cut the cord before it becomes more financially expensive for them to separate. Because often the longer you're with somebody, in terms of support or property division, it could mean that there's a higher check greater check that has to be written, right? So
yeah, I feel like, but if money is your concern, it almost feels counterproductive to like then go and half your net worth in order to solve the problem.
Yeah, it does. I mean, there's an expression that I won't say, that kind of relates to that. But yeah, I mean, I think that people, if they're young enough and they have their whole lives ahead of them and they're not happy, they just, at the end of the day, I don't think people are making these decisions just based on finances. I think there's a lot of factors that are going into making that decision to do it.
Maybe men are more comfortable coming forward with the financial question instead of like, I don't feel loved.
Well, I think that's their first thought almost, because like we went through that too. I'll talk about it like kind of candidly so I don't get like murdered. But I think that's men's, typically generalizing again, but they do think of it in more practical ways like that with finance. Whether women are like, I don't feel seen, I need an emotional connection, let's talk about this, whatever. They hear those things and they're like, how much is this going to cost me? You know what I mean? Like, how much is the therapy going to cost me? If I get a separation or a divorce, how much is that going to cost me? What's worth it? Like, they almost like weigh their options, when we're not, typically women usually don't get there right away. We're more emotional on that side.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the reasons are more heartfelt for women to actually initiate it. I mean, I think that we're often guided by our hearts. So I think we make decisions based on our intuition. Obviously, we're thinking things through, but initially, I think that it comes down to feelings a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting.
Cheating, I'm sure.
Oh yeah, cheating.
I saw something on Instagram that like men cheat for variety and women cheat for emotional. Like,
interesting.
Yeah.
On Instagram? Well, if you saw it on Instagram,
it must be true. Also, women probably cheat for variety as well.
I also heard, probably on Instagram.
Instagram, the source of all sources.
Yeah, exactly. That men whose spouse, if it's a woman, okay, if it's a heterosexual relationship, if their spouse has an emotional relationship, they are not nearly as affected as if their spouse cheats on them physically, whereas it's the reverse for women. So if their husbands are cheating on them emotionally, that's more destructive than a physical relationship.
That makes sense.
Fascinating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's not legal advice.
That's just us pondering.
Yes.
Based on information we learned on the interweb.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's pause here for a quick break, and we will be right back with more from Julie.
What's in our cups? Probably INE Plus Nutrition. We added INE Plus Nutrition supplements into our daily routine about a year ago. Our favorite is their Super Greens powder that delivers the gut-healing, energy-inspiring effects of superfoods like ginseng, spirulina, wheatgrass, alfalfa, and so many more. Seriously, we would never have the time, energy, or patience to source and consume all of these herbs, vegetables, and green foods every day. So we love that INE Plus Nutrition has done all the hard work for us.
All we have to do is shake with some water and ice and enjoy. The best part? All of INE Plus Nutrition's products are manufactured in Canada, third-party tested, CGMP, FDA, and NSF certified, so you can feel good about what you're consuming. Try it for yourself by visiting them online at inenutrition.com and use code RMX10 for 10% off at checkout. And now, back to the show. Okay, we are back, and we're going to dive into separation versus divorce. I know they go hand in hand, but can you be indefinitely separated? Like,
you can.
You can.
You can be indefinitely separated. A separation is just a marker of time about when one person usually says to the other or writes it or whatever, communicates that the relationship's over. So it doesn't necessarily have to be agreed. One person can think, well, I thought we were already separated, or, sometimes there's gray areas, but you can be separated indefinitely.
And is there like pros and cons to each? Like, I mean, separation, is it cheaper than divorce so you can stay separated?
Yeah, I mean, yes, except potentially not in the long run. Usually when people separate and they enter into a separation agreement, which most people do as opposed to a court order, there's full releases in there. So what people often don't understand, and this has happened many times where we've had clients who've separated, we're in the process, exchanging documents, and the spouse dies, and then there's a whole estate law, separate proceeding that's happening. So people don't really understand the legalities, I think, of not pursuing it. There's also limitation periods that people have to be considerate of when they separate. You only have a certain amount of time to make certain claims against the other spouse. So if you do nothing for 10 years, you might be out of luck on most of them.
Right.
And when you're drafting separation papers, are you drafting them legally, properly through you, or is it something you can write to each other and have an understanding?
It's a really good question, because it happens a lot where we call these kitchen table agreements, people who just draft them together at their table. Usually one person types it. They find some template online, and usually it's not Canadian or Ontario law. And then
you're like, also don't do that. Not recommended.
Right, don't do it. It's not an automatic that won't hold up, but it can be set aside. And anytime you're dealing with a situation, a couple years later, perhaps where one person wants to rely on that kitchen table agreement and the other person doesn't, it can be very expensive to try to unwind what has been done, because if it does meet the requirements for it to be a legal contract, then
it's binding.
It can be binding. Whether it's enforced is a little bit different test, different legal test, but it still can be a very expensive thing to try to negotiate or argue about in court.
So do common law couples have to go through the same process as married, like legally married people, that they have to do the separation agreement, and then divorce?
So they don't have to get a divorce
Okay.
because they're not legally married.
Right.
In Ontario, it's different, I'm sure, in other provinces and jurisdictions, but in Ontario, they would not have to apply for a divorce. But they still have separate claims that can be made. They could have support claims. They might have some property claims in terms of a trust claim, which we don't need to get into all of that right now, but they also may have claims, and they also may have children together.
And kids, once you have kids, right?
Yeah. So a separation agreement is completely advisable if you're common law as well.
Right. Okay. And we do have, I just want to make a note as well. We did an event with Julie probably about a year ago now.
February.
And
winter.
It was cold.
It was cold. Being cold.
Well, it's about to be cold again. So.
I know.
But we will link to the recap of that event, because we got into a lot of like the nitty gritty.
We did
in that conversation. So
Yeah.
if anybody wants like family law facts, the post is called Family Law 101 on our website. You can search for it, but we'll also link it in show notes if you want more like in-depth info. About
Everyone
that.
wants to pick your brain.
Yeah, there were great questions that were asked that night. So
yeah, we had a lot of good audience participation that day. The
we
people
did.
came prepared.
Oh yeah.
They're like, free legal
They're like,
advice.
what?
Yes.
When do you
I will
ever
be
get
there.
free legal advice? I'm in.
Never. Okay, so we talked about this briefly before the break, but a common concern for a lot of people is the kids and how divorce is going to affect them.
Mhm.
So how have your clients navigated this aspect of the separation process, and or how have they done that well? And are the kids really all right after all the dust is settled? You mentioned that if there's not like a lot of contention within the home, then generally they are.
But I mean, even, the goal obviously is to help people get through this situation. So, sometimes we involve parenting mediators who are usually social workers and specifically deal with parenting plans involving high conflict separating families. So they're very beneficial. We have a whole roster of people that are, there's amazing people in the city who do this exclusively. And to be honest, I think they do a better job than lawyers do, almost always. So if it's appropriate to refer to a client to a parenting mediator, we will. It's usually a little bit cheaper too, because they're splitting those fees, and usually social workers are not charging the same as a lawyer.
Right.
So I think that getting the family into some kind of a therapeutic support, whether it be a mediator with some family therapy or therapy for a child on their own, all of these are options, and we really encourage that because that is what the courts are promoting.
Right. And so that also comes down to communication, no? Like, isn't that the purpose of a counselor or a therapist, is to just like get into a space where people are comfortable voicing their concerns and their wants and their needs and trying to come to a mutual agreement with everything?
Yes. And there can be ongoing, discussions with a mediator, even after a parenting agreement has been fully executed. Sometimes, one of the dispute resolution clauses might be to return to a mediator to have certain discussions about an issue that comes up down the road that was not foreseeable, or there might be a parenting coordinator involved. But, some kind of having a system where we have other people that we can refer our clients to, so that they know if something comes up, which inevitably something will, then they have somebody to go to talk about these things.
Yeah.
I mean, it makes sense. It would be nice to have a mediator, like with everything in life. Like, all the time. Hold on. Can you come over? Mediate this conversation for me?
Yeah.
Okay. So speaking of settling dust, how long would you say it typically takes for the grieving of the relationship period to end and for the living their best life phase to begin post-divorce? Because that's what we really want to know.
So going back to what we talked about before about if a woman is initiating a separation or whoever's initiating it, but often they are further ahead emotionally than the spouse, right? And so
they're like, I have grieved.
Yeah. Sometimes they've fully grieved. And sometimes, the last, 10% that kind of comes after everything's signed and whatnot, and it's legalized, if you will, that might take a little bit of time. But I continue to keep in touch with some of my clients post-separation, whether it's because they have an issue that's come up again. But, I would say it's not that long, like a year to two after it's all done. I talked to somebody yesterday who I signed off on her agreement probably a year ago. She's dating a ton. She said she had
it.
the best summer,
The bounce back is real.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
But so you think that maybe it would take the man in a relationship who maybe hasn't gotten to that point of,
well, maybe if they
emotionally
I don't know. I
separating?
think that they could jump right back in, but they're not really grieving, right? Maybe.
Right.
I
Yeah,
think
maybe.
people who are jumping right back in haven't grieved properly, or
Right.
not to say that there's only one way to grieve, but they may not have really processed it.
Right.
And they're just
Well,
like,
and once
ready for the
those
next.
Right.
documents are signed and you move out or whatever, it starts to just become very real. Because before that, you're just talking and doing the thing. And then
Yeah.
once you start actually living separate lives, whatever that
yeah.
balance is for you, you kind of probably feel different. You jump back in, right?
Yeah, that limbo period is not a comfortable period for most
Right.
people, and there's a lot of uncertainty still and a lot of animosity, but the majority of the time, not always, but the majority of the time, once people sign off, a lot of the conflict goes away.
Because it's like a finality to it.
Yeah, yeah.
A
It doesn't,
resolution.
until the next issue comes up,
Yeah.
but,
Back to court.
Oh, you're
back
still
to the
here?
mediator. Yeah. There's a little honeymoon phase after, maybe.
Yeah, that sounds about right. So everyone's going for an amicable divorce. Like everybody wants an amicable divorce. So
Yeah.
what are some do's and don'ts, would you say, to get to that end point? Like what are some things people definitely should do and what are some things they should absolutely avoid?
So I think when it comes to finances, doing anything surreptitiously, sneakily, where you're cutting off your spouse from credit cards or doing anything that's quite drastic, that sends people into a tailspin usually.
course,
Nobody
yeah.
wants to not know and what's going on and have the rug pulled out from underneath them. So maintaining the financial status quo until there's been an agreement on even an interim arrangement for payment of bills and the mortgage and all of that, we always advise just maintain the status quo. We'll get there, And then when it comes to parenting, one of the things you can really do that's awful is to speak really badly about the other
I've heard
parent
this. Yeah.
or to go to and tell the kids, before the other spouse does. And sometimes in certain situations, you can't tell the kids together that you're separating, right? If there's a domestic violence situation or there's criminal charges and somebody's, living somewhere else immediately and very quickly, it's not appropriate. But, there's many of these mediators that we refer our clients to, they can actually help them figure out a plan for how to tell the kids.
Right.
That's united. And, I think most people just, sometimes they use their kids as pawns in this if they're angry with their spouse, especially.
Well, that's so hard for the kids.
Yeah,
too.
if they weren't
feel
the
like
one
they're-
initiating
yeah,
it, right? So
right.
if they're caught off guard, they, transfer that anger to a little child. So we try to avoid that. I mean, the best thing that people can do is if they are separating, consult with a lawyer right away. People seem to think that means the gloves are off, but it doesn't mean that. It's just that we're going to try to get you set up with some kind of an interim plan so that the conflict is diffused.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
I mean,
too.
it comes down to respect at the end of the day, I think, and communication and stuff too, right? Like
Yeah.
if you have a common respect for each other, you can do the hard things together. If you don't, you don't. You might
It's
need a
true.
mediator,
I feel like a lot of people don't.
Yeah.
Right? He doesn't
Yeah.
in a mood.
That's true.
I'm just being a realist today now, okay? Today
Okay,
and
so
forever.
we get a lot of divorce questions in our private group, like a lot.
Which you've
Yeah.
seen because we
Which
tag
I've
you
seen.
in all of them.
Yes,
Yeah.
I need to be more diligent about responding to all of them. But yes, I see them.
But something we see a lot is fear on the part of the stay-at-home mom who feels stuck in her
Mhm.
relationship due to her financial dependence on her spouse.
Yeah.
So what kind of advice would you give someone in that position?
Really, it just means reach out, have that 20-minute call, because
See
if
what your
you
options
can
are.
if you can tell us a little bit about your family, who does what, how long you've been together, what the incomes are, if maybe one person doesn't have an income, it doesn't mean that they cannot leave. It just means that we need to be more creative in terms of how we're going to get you into a position where you can leave the relationship. But, if you've been together for a long time and one person earns all of the income for the family and one person doesn't, there's going to be a support payment that's paid.
Mhm.
So sometimes people don't know that. They think that whatever their spouse earns, they have no entitlement to that because it's not property, but it's income. And if you've been together for quite a long time and there's an entitlement to spousal support, there's going to be an entitlement to a large portion of that income.
There's a calculator online, right?
Yeah, there's a calculator
something.
online.
I remember my spousal support.
My support
something.
calculator.
Yeah, that's what it is.
.ca,
Because it's just going around everywhere.
Yeah.
People keep talking about it. So
yeah,
it's good to know that stuff and have that consultation too and know what your options are.
Most of the people in the position of not working or, earning significantly less than their spouse are quite shocked when I run some preliminary numbers for them and let them know, this is likely the range that you're going to be looking at.
Right.
They're like, okay, bye.
Yeah.
Thanks, Julie.
Yeah, that's all I needed to know. See you later. But I feel like another thing that people are afraid of is leaving the marital home. Like I know that there's some situations where you have to, like if it's not safe for you to be there, then you have to leave. But what are the ramifications of doing that?
That's a tricky one, especially if there's kids. I mean, people sometimes think, am I losing my right to a home? And if you are married and that is a matrimonial home, then you have a right to live there. Both parties have a right to live there. If there's safety concerns and there are children involved, then it becomes a little bit more complicated because we've seen it all. We've been on both sides of this situation in terms of our representation. When someone just leaves with the kids, it can be construed as self-help. And self-help is when somebody is helping themselves to whatever parenting time they want, right? There's no agreement. There's no court order. Sometimes that can backfire significantly. So, if there are safety concerns, usually we help try to implement a safety plan.
Okay.
Which usually means getting in right away and proposing an interim schedule where both parents are in different physical spaces.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That's fair.
Good to know. I'm like, my head is like,
I know.
So much to think about.
Well, it comes up so much.
Yeah.
Like, honestly, we have 11,000 women in our private group and almost every day.
Yeah.
Well, and I
divorce question comes up and people are like, I would say that the majority of people are afraid because a lot of them earn significantly less because obviously our group is all moms.
Yeah.
So we know what happens with the motherhood penalty. If they are working, they're likely to be making less than their spouse, or they're working part-time in order to facilitate, school pickup and drop off and whatever.
Yeah.
So they're really scared that this is not a feasible option for them.
Yeah.
So it's good to know that
just getting information helps, sort of calm that fear down quite a bit.
Yeah, for
it's
sure.
It's just a lack of information. Yeah. And don't even bother Googling it because you'll get, different articles that say one thing and the other says the opposite. So, yeah.
I know Google is not always your friend.
It's not great.
It's not. No, it's not.
As we know. And Instagram, on the other hand, is gospel.
And yes. And sometimes I was just going to add to that. Sometimes those women, if they're stay-at-home moms, for example, they might be the male or their partner might be sort of like scaring them in the way of like, you literally can't do this by yourself and making you feel that way emotionally. So it's very hard for them to think that they can.
Yeah.
So I think it is really empowering and powerful that one conversation just to understand what the options actually are instead of listening to what that person's telling you and scaring the daylight out of you. Like it's terrifying, right?
Yeah. Well, it's emotional abuse, right? And so it's gaslighting, it's all of that. But, we have many clients who have felt that way, and hung on for as long as they could until it just got too bad that they were in a position where they were so desperate to leave that they thought, what, I'd rather go to a homeless shelter than live one more day in this house.
Right.
So yeah, unfortunately, for some people, it gets to that point. But, that's why we just encourage people to get a little bit of information.
Yeah, knowledge is power.
Okay.
On that note, we're taking our final break and we'll be right back.
We are forever on a mission to find natural skincare products that actually work. And dare we say, we found the unicorn. And it's called Birch Babe. Birch Babe and Birch Baby is a female and family-led award-winning sustainable skincare, clean beauty, and baby care company created and manufactured right here in Canada. We are absolutely in love with their product line. Our current favorites include their Natural Glow Face Serum, Golden Hour Brightening Vitamin C Serum, their lip and cheek tints, perfect for lazy makeup people like us, and their Skin Food Body Balm. To try any of their 60 plus products for yourself, visit them online at www.birchbabe.com and use code RebelMamaBB15 at checkout for 15% off your first order.
Okay, we are back. And we have a couple of questions, and then we're going to go into some overrated or underrated questions. It's a fun little
Sounds
game we like to play.
good.
So you probably get questions from friends all the time. But
Yes.
what is one piece of advice you would give to your friend, like somebody that you love and care for? What would be your top piece of advice for them if they're considering a divorce?
If they're considering a divorce, I would kind of walk them through the different scenarios, right? And make sure that they understand the implications, because sometimes people don't. A lot of the time people don't. If they've sort of made that decision that they want to go forward and they're just waiting to sort of pull the trigger on it, my advice, and I've said this to certain friends, is just rip the Band-Aid off. Just
That's
get it
good
done.
advice.
Just get it done. There's no benefit usually to dragging it out. I know there's some legal strategy to certain positions that can be drawn out, but in terms of trying to get it done, just rip the Band-Aid off.
And there's a fear around that, right? So
Yeah.
you need someone like you to be like, rip the Band-Aid off. It's okay. You have
Yeah.
these things and these
Yeah.
resources and these options.
Yeah.
Okay, rip
Julie's-
the Band-Aid off.
Julie's a hit at parties. Yeah, that's all I know. It's like everyone just hangs out with her. Hey, what should I do? Rip the Band-Aid off, babe.
Okay, your last question is, what is one change you would like to see in the world of divorce and separation?
It really has to do with our court system. I mean, the system is flawed. Generally, it's because there's not enough judges. There's not enough resources. The courts are backlogged. People are always shocked when I tell them, that it's going to take months to get before a judge. Sometimes during the pandemic, it was taking up to a year to have a conference with a judge where
Wow.
a judge can't actually make a substantive order. They can only provide opinions. So it is a really long, drawn out process. It is an essential part of our culture, or part of our system that we have. We need a court, but at the same time, we need way more resources to be allocated to this. There's a shortage of judges in almost every jurisdiction in Ontario, a massive shortage of judges. And that means that everyone who wants to or needs a judge to get involved and help them, they're not able to right away. And the judges are overworked.
Right.
They have the best of intentions to try to get people through. And we've been before judges who are scheduling matters at 8 a.m. They don't have to do that. They're just doing that because maybe we got stuck on a certain point and they really want to try to get it done for this particular family, which is amazing. But sometimes they're not really paid even to do that, So everyone is overworked. Everyone, even the court, not just the judges, but the court staff, there's been a big transition also because of the pandemic to convert filings and whatnot with the court remotely or virtually, like electronically, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the systems have all changed very quickly, but we need way more resources to be devoted to that.
What role does the judge play? Like, why are they the ones that just decide that this is what you put in the agreement is?
But is it those high conflict
it's usually
more?
cases
it's not
where
those,
you
right.
can't come up with an agreement,
Yeah.
right?
Oh.
So where you've tried or it's impossible, and you have to get it into court to have a judge weigh in or make a decision.
Oh
And
my
there's that
God.
many of those cases?
Oh yeah, yeah,
That's scary in itself.
yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
would think that there would be a lot of those cases. Like some people
Yeah.
are just going to dig their heels in and
Oh yeah,
say,
Well,
like, I'm
there-
going to make
yeah.
this as hard for you as I can possibly make it because I don't want to get
No,
divorced.
it's true. People do it out of spite, just drag you through the court system for years.
Yeah, or there's, counsel that may be unreasonable, or there's lots of different reasons why we go to court.
Wow.
More judges. That's what we need.
More judges. Yeah.
Do you want
Anyone
to
know a
become
judge? Yeah.
No, I do not.
I mean, now seems like a good time to get into it.
Yeah.
Pivot.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
No, thank you.
You sure? I think you should consider it. Okay, let's do some overrated.
Overrated,
or
underrated.
Alex,
so you just
can do the honors.
Okay.
you
have to
just
explain this to
choose
me.
one, whether you think it's overrated or underrated.
Okay.
You can weigh in with your 2 cents. You don't have to. We probably will.
Okay.
Okay. So first one, couples retreats or therapy, like the togetherness.
Underrated.
Underrated.
Mm,
Yeah.
Okay.
So you would say it works. Okay.
Yeah.
Mediation.
Underrated, for sure.
Does that ever replace the role of a lawyer or a lot of it?
You can mediate without a lawyer,
Okay.
but you need a lawyer still to give you independent legal advice before you sign off on anything that maybe you agree to verbally in mediation.
So lawyer first, then mediation, or mediation first and then lawyer?
It can be both, but if you are going through mediation, you should have a lawyer in your back pocket. So
Okay.
I would always start with consult with a lawyer
Okay.
and
Good.
get references for a mediator from that lawyer.
Smart.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're only
good
going
call.
to you, Julie. Don't worry. Open marriage.
Oh, interesting. I've only had one client or one file that involved this, and it was a disaster. So I'm going to say overrated.
But it's just the one.
Yeah,
Like,
so
how
maybe
many-
it's underrated. I'm
How many
wondering
closed
if-
marriages?
I'm wondering if it works or not.
Just because the one was specifically a nightmare.
Yeah.
I get that.
Joint bank accounts.
Oh, it's like even on that. I don't know. Sometimes, okay, I'm just going to say underrated.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But also, you have to have your own.
Yeah.
So-
So have the joint
Yeah.
account, but also have your own.
Don't have
little-
everything tied up.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe
Yeah, that
just
makes
that one
sense.
account just for the kids.
Right.
The
For
family-
mortgage
the family
account.
account, yeah.
Yeah.
The utilities.
Yeah.
Whatever.
And conscious uncoupling. Sorry. Conscious uncoupling. aka
Overrated.
Overrated.
What does that even mean?
Well, that's
Ask
the
Gwyneth.
thing, right? You know, I have people come in. I really, really want to do this, a conscious uncoupling. What does that mean? These are just two
It's-
words.
there's-
That are
well,
I
that's
know
the
what it
thing.
means, but it doesn't really. It can be the best of intentions that
Yeah.
people have,
yeah.
but often people don't understand the process before they come in with that goal. Sure, we'll keep that in mind, but
Yeah.
overrated.
Overrated.
Let's just call it an amicable divorce because
Call it an amicable divorce.
That's
yeah.
what it really.
I think
That's
that
more
just blew up as a
resonating.
trend, and there was a book about it, and
Yeah.
people were kind of doing it themselves, and Gwyneth Paltrow coined it,
Yes.
and whatever. But that's a very hard thing to do by yourself.
Yeah, and it's very vague.
Well, and you know for sure that Gwyneth had
Yeah,
a
like
big legal team with her. while
she's
she
Right.
also not
consciously-
worried
Yeah.
about money.
No.
Neither is Chris Martin. They're like, it's fine. See you later. Okay, Julie, thank you so much for coming and for your time here. Is there anywhere people can go to find you online? Your website?
Yeah, we have a website. It's www.tyasfamilylaw.ca. My email address is just my first name at tyasfamilylaw.ca. And then we have a general info at, which is also accessible.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Get those 20-minute consultation calls in.
Yeah.
Exactly. And then you can also find Tyas Family Law on our directory, and you can find more information there. And again, we will link to the Family Law 101 blog post that we did
Yeah.
post event with you, so people can find that too. Well, thank you again.
Thank you for having me.
Our pleasure. Thank you to our lovely listeners for tuning in once again to the Rebel Mama podcast. As always, we'd like you to like, rate, and review this podcast wherever you listen. Feel free to share it with someone that you think could benefit from it. And if
Watch
you
us
so
on-
desire,
Watch us on YouTube.
this podcast was produced by Space Monkey inside the Soda Studio. The song you're listening to is called Name and Number off the debut album Unrequited by Roshan. Stream it now on Apple Music.